Welcome everybody to ISA Presents Writing for a Budget with our special guest, Jacob Mosler. Jacob Mosler is an award-winning producer. He's founder and CEO of Film Budget Pro. So guys, go to filmbudgetpro.com to check it out. You can get in touch with Jacob. He is a producer who has produced more than 40 short films, music videos, commercials, and documentaries, and tackles all aspects of production from development through deliverables. So again, check out Film Budget Pro, and you guys can reach out to Jacob after this is over, find out all about budgets and schedules and tax incentive and all of that stuff.
Welcome, everybody. Thanks, Shayna. Appreciate the introduction. And so a little bit more about me. I have been working since 1995 as a filmmaker, and I've been a producer on 16 feature films. I went to the American Film Institute in 98 to 2000 and started making feature films after that. And as Shayna outlined, I've also been a producer on multiple short format projects, short films, commercials, and lately I've been working in the documentary space. So long form documentaries. It's all storytelling, and I'm excited to share with you some ideas and hopefully some salient takeaways for your writing process in terms of thinking about budget. I would say that the course called Writing for Budget is just to get your attention. Obviously, you're writing to tell your story and to inspire folks. And so the Writing for Budget takeaways will be things that you can be mindful of when you're writing that will help reduce the budget. Obviously, the budget is a really critical part of the process. And we want to really, I'm going to outline for you how everything is created and then go through some examples of ways in which you can write for budget and potentially really increase the potential for your project to get financed. So, let's begin. One of the key things that I like to outline and kind of explain to my clients when we start the process of budgeting a film and scheduling is that what's critical is that the script and the budget and the schedule are in alignment. And in other words, they're in harmony. They're speaking to one another in terms of which, so they're not in conflict. And obviously the script is your vision. It's the vision, it's the creative blueprint for the project. And that's what all of you writers are so brilliant at and what your craft is. Obviously the schedule is the time component. I'm gonna go into how a schedule is created, and then the budget is the financial component. And those three documents being in harmony in pre-production is what is critical. So what happens if they're not in harmony or really in alignment with what I would consider as just reality? You're either going to run out of money or you're going to run out of time, or you're going to have a bunch of money left over. But most often people are running out of time and they're running out of money. And then that's all compromising the vision in the script. And everybody's goal is to make a great film and make something that's inspirational. And a film is really written in three stages. Of course, there's the screenwriting process and the screenwriting part where it's just a person or a couple people at a computer. And I'd say that's the most critical part, is because you're really laying down the story and the narrative and the script and the blueprint. And then it's written again when you're shooting. It's really written in the field, like, what are you filming? And then it's written a third time and really published at the end of post-production, the editorial process and making all the final decisions of what you have. So I like to set up my clients and all my colleagues and the projects that I'm a producer on to have the best chance of success to make a great film. And so this is the part that's painstaking and many levels and frustrating on many levels for filmmakers and financiers and everybody. But let's have fun and get right into it. So you could substitute the word client for filmmaker, director, writer. So what are your expectations? And then a lot of times the budget is just not in alignment with those expectations. And this one made me laugh. I've seen a few different versions of this. And so this process is really about getting those expectations into alignment. And I'm trying to provide some takeaways for when you're writing to help with being considerate of budget. This is another fun one. I don't know if you've seen this: fast, good, cheap, pick two. You can't have all three. This happens a lot where people are compromising their vision by rushing or cutting the budget or cutting the vision. And so you want to avoid this. You know, the sweet spot's right in the middle there, and that's a really hard place to get. But with the proper planning, again, the proper alignment of the vision, the script, the schedule, and the budget, you can set yourself up for success. So you're not running out of money, running out of time, compromising the project, and ending up with, you know, an inferior vision where it just didn't work out as well as you'd hoped. So let's get into the process. We sent over, we're going to have some samples that we can follow up with. This is a screenplay that I wrote with my writing partner about 20 years ago. And they say everybody's got a screenplay they can write. This was mine. I'm not a professional screenwriter, but we worked on it for years. And so I'm just going to use this as an example for the process of building a schedule and the budget and the takeaways. So we've got the opening here. What happens when we schedule your script? Well, the first thing I do when I'm going to schedule and budget a project is I read the script, just relaxed, start to finish, usually from an iPad, and just kind of let it wash over me like a movie. So I'm reading the script just like anybody else and how you would like them. Take in the story, take in the overall arc, and just let it flow. And then we roll up our sleeves and we start to break down the script. So every element goes into a breakdown page, beginning with exterior, okay? And we're at a lake and it's dawn. This is all informative, where we're shooting and when. All of our characters arrive in a VW van. So we start listing all of them. Every character goes into the breakdown, and we have actors going out to swim, floating on a dock. An actor is diving, that would be considered a stunt. And essentially we just start to line up all of the elements from the script. And where do they go? Well, they go into what's called in movie magic, the breakdown sheet. So here's all of that information in Movie Magic scheduling. This software has been around for, I think, 25 years. It's the industry standard, and it's custom scheduling software for narrative projects, feature films, television, all the narrative work. So we start to break down scene one, exterior, Lake Washington, morning. Here's the synopsis of the scene. It's on page one. Here's all of our cast. Quite a big cast this day. We've got, looks like 8 or 9 cast members. We've got some vehicles. We're shooting on water. And this is the process, scene by scene, breaking them down scene by scene. So all the detail goes into the breakdown sheets first, and then we build the schedule. So once we have all the breakdown sheets, we do what's called sorting and selecting. And that's taking all of the scenes and putting them into a logical shooting sequence so that you're not jumping around. So we're going to stay at what's called the LCH, which for this script is the Lake City house. So most of the story takes place at a house, and we're shooting in a logical sequence. We're going to go in and shoot out locations within the house in a logical shooting sequence so that it's efficient. So we go shoot the living room. This one we're moving around a little bit, but for instance, we're going to shoot Elias's closet this day. And you start to build a logical shooting sequence for the script, and it's built out day by day by day. And this is what's called the strip board. So this represents the detailed shooting schedule. So there's a lot of things to be mindful of when you're scheduling. One of them is obviously your locations and then the time of day. So if you're shooting night work, you're going to need to put that at the end of the weeks so that you're working into night, and because it's obviously you're working later and later each day. So you don't want to put the night work at the beginning of the week. You're obviously wanting to also be as efficient as possible always. And one of the things that's important is to consider what they call company moves, moving the whole company, the film company, to another location. So you're minimizing the company moves because while you have to do them, they're not that efficient. Everybody has to get into the trucks and move them. And if you're doing a company move within a workday, it's time that you're not shooting. So you're being mindful of where you put the company moves. There's one right here. Now we're company moving to the non-house locations. And here is a day where we're just all over the place. We're at the University of Washington dorm, then we're in an apartment, then we're at a landlord house, then we're at a garden store, a lighting store, department store. So the idea here would be to shoot near the university, get the dorm, get an apartment and an office, and then move to a store. So that's a very ambitious day. You can see here it's 3 6/8 of a page, which is not a high page count for a small independent film, but there's a lot of scenes and a lot of moves. We actually haven't slugged in the company moves, but the idea would be to not move the company from base camp, and you would do small, what's called mini moves to these various locations. So this would be a challenge for location scouting. You're going to find all of these things within a few blocks of each other so that you minimize the moves. Okay. And we don't have to look through this entire thing, but it's a shooting schedule for the entire film. And I just want to go to the end and look at, okay, we built out a 30-day schedule. Now for an independent film, a 30-day schedule would be really nice. A lot of independent films are made on a 20-day schedule or 25, and 30 is pretty good. 35 is obviously better, but time is money. And so the more shoot days, the more expensive the shoot. The more time you have, obviously, the more time that you can put into the filming of the scenes and increase the production value. So there's that equation kind of pulling and pushing in terms of how much time. So this plan represents a 30-day shoot. And so I'm going to move on to give you a look at the budget. So this script was budgeted actually quite a while ago. It was budgeted in 2002, I think. So 1.5 million 20 years ago. So things have changed, but this was set up then at that level. And so I'll give you a little overview of what a budget looks like. This is another set of software called Movie Magic Budgeting. It's basically a customized Excel program that has been around for 25 years and everybody uses. This is the top sheet. A lot of times this is all that people care about and look at in terms of what is the bottom line. How much is this movie going to cost? Well, this budget says it's 1.5 million. I can tell you right now, I don't think this is a realistic budget at all. We were just doing what a lot of filmmakers, financiers do, is just trying to hit a number. Okay, what do we think we can raise? So we backed into this number, let's see what it looks like at 1.5 million. And so that's what this budget represents. So here's the top sheet, and then there's all of these categories. So here's the most important, is what are the writers getting paid? So we put in 30,000. It's pretty low. Obviously, it's not WGA. It's not a union film or a guild film. We put in 30,000 for the script. Here we have some clearances for all of the publishing and this title search and copyright search. And then I'll just give it a quick glance through. So this is the producer and director section. Again, non-guild, low budget film. We've got 3 producers, a director. Here's everybody's fees. Just flip through and show you a few. So let's talk about the cast. So this was budgeted quite a while ago on the SAG modified low budget weekly. So this assumes we're going to hire SAG actors, of course. And then we've got all of our characters. So here's our lead character at 5 weeks and onward from there. So the schedule is, of course, informing when people work. So I'll give you an example. Back to the schedule. We do all this work of every scene gets a breakdown sheet. All the breakdown sheets go in. We sort them into a logical, smart shooting sequence that creates our strip board and our schedule. So we can see, how does it look laid out in 30 days? We might do a pass at 25 days. This is the 30-day pass. The brilliant thing about the software is once it's built, you can go in and create what's called day out of days. These are exports that show what it sounds like. It's the day out of days that those elements are working. So here is an example of the day out of days for cast. Here's all of our cast members. And this is when they're working and not working. So SW means start work. H means hold. So they're not working that day, but they're still going to work again. So they're on a hold. And work, 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 start work, drop. So this is the schedule for all of the cast. Okay. And I said earlier, this has got a big cast. Here's an example of a day of a lot of cast members. And the transportation department in a movie might look at the day out of days like, all right, we need to put all of these actors somewhere. They're either going to go into trailers or what's called a honey wagon, which is a big long trailer with little tiny rooms. Or sometimes day players will just hang out in a room in a house or a pop-up trailer. Per the SAG agreement, you need to provide a place for them to change for costuming. But so just glancing at this from a transportation point of view and budgeting, it's like, wow, we have a lot of cast here. I won't count them up at this moment, but it's like 10 or 12. So we're going to need rooms for all of them. And certainly the top 6 will probably be expecting, and it might be contractual, that they're going to get a trailer, a single room trailer for a big actor, or a 2-room trailer they're sharing, or a 3-room trailer. So they're getting their trailer. It's got to be there. So one of the things that I get a comment on often is, why is the transportation department so big? Well, you're talking about a lot of vehicles and a lot of movement. The transportation department is, for the union, it's Teamsters. They get paid very well, and it just all adds up. So here's the example of the shooting days. So here's the total, and you can see like, wow, our leads are all working pretty much the whole movie, and here's the total. So that informs the budget. So I'm going through and I'm budgeting each actor based on the schedule, how many days they work. Here's their agent fee, line by line, each person all the way through. Here's those day players. Okay. Now we also, we're going to budget for overtime. So that's in there. So moving on from cast, travel and living. So where you're shooting is a huge consideration. So when you're going to bring cast or the above the line producers, directors to the location and some of the crew, obviously you need to fly them and put them up. Hotel, per diem, car rentals. So all of that adds up. So this is that section of the budget where we're budgeting, okay, we've got an allowance for 6 actors to come from Los Angeles. And here's the estimate of how many hotel nights they'll need. That's not a very realistic number for hotels, 75 a night. So if I were budgeting this today, I would probably put $300 a night or $250. Maybe you can get an Airbnb and get that down, but you don't want to be overly aggressive there. And you certainly want your cast to be happy wherever they're staying. Here's the cast per diem, $60 a day. Here's their rental vehicles. So that's the above the line travel section of the budget. Now let's go to what's called below the line. Below the line is all your crew and all of your production rentals and expenses, everything that's basically not writer, director, producer, cast, and their travel. So the production staff is your assistant director department, script, accounting, coordinators, office staff, all of those folks. Here's your extras. So in here we have an extras allowance of 250 man days. So what are man days? Man days are just basically a total. Across the entire movie, we count them up one by one for each scene, how many extras we need. So this estimate is 250, which is actually pretty low. And I think, knowing my script, that was not very realistic also. But per day, you're going to need maybe 10 one day or 0 the next day, but then you need 30 because you're in a big bar. So we add up all the extras and get them budgeted in. This is a non-union show, so you would budget them for minimum wage. If it was a SAG show, it's the SAG rate, which is well above minimum wage, and overtime and all of the SAG fringes and union obligations. So we've got our extras. Here's art department, production designer, designers, coordinator, and here we're into construction, and then special effects. Set operations is all of your grip department. Those are the guys moving the things to shape the light. They're not in charge of the lights themselves, but all of that C-stands and flags and all of that good stuff. For some reason, way back in the day, the craft service person department was part of grip department. And so they're in this section of the budget, in the same place where the medic is. So this is kind of all your set operations and the rentals. Okay, and then set dressing. So art department that are moving around all the set dressing and coming in and making your sets look great. And they are often working ahead of the crew and making sure the next location you're going to go to is ready. It's looking exactly how you would like. And then they come after you shoot and wrap everything and return it. So an art department might come into a location, and if you have a good budget, they're going to say, all right, let's get rid of all this stuff, and we're going to bring in the proper color couch, and we're going to paint the walls, and we're going to set dress it exactly how the director and the production designer want it to look. Again, which is all driven by your script. Props. So props are anything that the actors touch, and that's its own little department with all of the props. And then picture vehicles go in here. And I'm going to speak later about vehicle work, which is often very expensive. It can be complicated, and you have to make sure you're planning it safely. And just renting vehicles is a whole thing, and especially if it's period vehicles. So we'll talk more about picture cars, but that's where they are in the budget here in props. Wardrobe, self-explanatory. You've got your costume department, your costumers, wardrobe rentals, hair and makeup. Here is lighting. That's the gaffer and his team, all of the lights. Lighting is expensive. And the camera department, your DP, all of the camera assistants, your camera rentals, video playback, Steadicam, stills, all of that's in here. And let's see what I put for camera rental. Basic package, $2,500. So that was probably trying to get a deal from an owner operator, a very basic camera. I know that we were trying to shoot this on Super 16 millimeter film back in the day. We've got an underwater camera rig. So camera rentals can be expensive. Right now, Arri Alexa Mini, which is a very popular camera, the LF Mini is going for about $7,500 a week. You can try to get a better deal if you're renting it for a longer period, but again, it's a fantastic camera, but they're not cheap. Then we've got a sound department, of course, very important, record sound, transportation. So again, this is a non-union film, and I know this budget is very old, so it's not a big number, but on a union film, it's just huge because it's Teamsters and the vehicles really add up. So this is all your drivers, your vehicles, fuel, and then on to locations. Another department that's very expensive in most instances is locations. We're going to talk a lot about locations for writing for budget and things to be mindful of. Locations are expensive, and then supporting those locations, everything from permits, security, police. You have to sometimes have what's called an FSO, that's a fire safety officer, and then just having the location ready, layout board. So there's lots of considerations for locations on any level. And in here, we also have lots of other lines of sections of the budget, which is the below the line travel. Here's where we put our craft service and our catering. Important to feed the crew very well. And then all of the location support, renting bathrooms and cleaning and the site reps, parking, catering space, tents, all of that is in here. So location department's big. Like I said, this film was written back when Super 16 and everyone's still shooting on film before digital came in and really looked fantastic. So this was the old school. We're shooting on negative. It's getting processed, developed, and then telecine needed transferred to digital. So that was where all this went in. Most often nowadays, everything's digital. And so it's a much more smooth workflow, but still need a bunch of drives and a DIT for media management and then backups. So there's all the digital workflow that would be here now. Okay, so then tests. Now on to post-production. Just take a quick glance through this. We've got our editor, of course, and then a post supervisor. I don't know why we don't have an assistant editor. We should. And music. Music's obviously a big part of films. So usually two parts. You've got your composer that's writing the score, and it's specific for the story. And then what's called needle drop or licensing, masters and sync. So that's songs that already exist, whether they're already a popular song or just any song that's been recorded, or getting songs and music from libraries. And the music libraries these days are amazing. There's a lot of great stuff there, and you can actually get some great deals. Anyway, music can be very expensive. After streaming and all the stuff came in the early 2000s with Napster and file sharing, music in movies and television is one of the few places where musicians can still kind of have control and make money. So songs are expensive because you certainly have to license them. You can't just put a song in your movie and get it distributed without paying for it and having a license agreement. And so they can still control that. And that's a place where they can make money from their craft. Certainly not selling records these days, or most aren't. Music, here's our post sound. Again, very important, cleaning up all the sound, mixing it. If you've got a film with special effects or stunts, this is all the special effects, sound effects, what's called ADRs, additional dialogue recording. So making the sound perfect. This is the post sound department. And here is our finishing. Now this was film back in the day, all the film prints, and now it'd be all the digital deliverables. And here's main end and titles. They used to be made optically. Now it's pretty simple, done all in the computer, but you can do graphic design and get really fancy. And visual effects would also be in here. And then here is your deliverables. And that is the set of all of the files now. And there's a lot of them that go to the distributor, Netflix, Hulu, Amazon, you know, any of the studios. So it's a whole laundry list of detailed deliverables, picture, sound, legal, and it's basically what you're delivering when you sell the picture to them for distribution. And roughly deliverables are costing about, I'd say, $20,000 to $25,000 for domestic and foreign. And then so you want to absolutely have that in the budget. You don't want to run out of money and not be able to deliver the film when you get to the end of the road. If you have your distribution deals set up at the beginning, you're going to know what those are. Here's a little bit of publicity to basically take the film to a market. If you haven't got a distributor, you might go to Sundance or Cannes or the AFM or do a distributor screening. Insurance, very important. And legal, banking, other. So this is your accounting. So just to give you kind of a top-down review of the budget, so you can see like, well, what's all this stuff in here? That's just a quick review. And then the contingency is, it's standard to put 10%, and that's just your what if money, because most films take at least 9 months or a year or 2 years. So over that course of that time, there's a lot of things that can come up and change. So your contingency is the uncommitted money that you're going to use. Ideally, you don't use it, or you don't use all of it, or you don't need it until the end. You don't want to run out of that, but that's the what if money and the basically the cushion. So that's a quick overview of budget. And so I'm going to stop screen sharing here and start getting into examples. So the first consideration for writing your script is that I'd like to talk with you about and hopefully leave you with some nice takeaways is location. Location, location, location. So my advice is to just only have just three locations. No, I'm joking. So locations are expensive, and the more locations you have, the more complicated and expensive it is to move. So actually, I'm half joking, because to write a script that has fewer locations, and some of the advice I would give to my colleagues from film school is, you know, just if you really want to write a script that's going to be super efficient for budget, just try to write a story that's in one location with 3 actors. Oh, well, that's an interesting challenge. But that's how you're going to keep the budget down. And, you know, that's one of the reasons why a lot of times horror films are low budget. And that's a genre where, you know, often they'll just have one location or, you know, a couple locations. And then when the cast starts getting killed and dying off, you have a diminishing cast. And so horror films typically could be made for a lower budget. And that's true still today and back in the day. And so locations, again, as I outlined in the budget section and the schedule section, just there's a lot of implications. So you might say, well, I can get locations for free. And, you know, the old adage, nothing's really for free. There's no free lunch. There's a lot of implications for locations. Even if you can get your, say, your friend's house for free, you're still going to have an impact on the neighborhood, and you're going to need a place to park all the cars for your crew, even if you have a small crew. And often it's fun for the first day or the second day, and then your friend's going to start complaining, or the neighbors are going to start complaining. You're going to start to sort out problems on a bigger budget. And here's an example. So you're writing a script, you've got your lead characters, they need to have an important conversation. And your thought is, well, let's just have them walk down Melrose Avenue and they're going to talk and have that conversation. So you write the script, it's a page and a half, and they're going to talk and walk right down Melrose Avenue. So to do that legally and in a safe way and permitted, you're going to need to permit the whole thing. You're going to need to work with all of the store owners on that block, basically work out a deal with them for the time you need to shoot, because they're going to have to shut down. So you have to buy out all the stores. You're going to close that block, or at least while you're shooting. It's called ITC, intermittent control. And so pedestrians aren't going through. And if your actors are walking and talking, probably going to cover that with a steady cam or an easy rig and have that movement through. So Melrose, Los Angeles, that would be very expensive. Just from the permitting side of it, working with all the store owners, shutting that down, having all of your equipment and all your production vehicles as close as possible, paying for that parking lot. So that conversation happening on Melrose is one version that you may write, and then we would schedule and budget that. An alternative would be to have that conversation in Griffith Park, and your two actors are sitting under a tree and they're talking. Okay, I'm just throwing out an alt that would be much less expensive. Then you would work with the parks department and go in. Griffith Park is huge. There's all these parking lots. People film there all the time, and you would have control. So that's an example of a dramatically different approach that would be much more efficient for cost and time. Certainly having control is also one of the things that's really important. So it's a consideration, locations, and a few more layers to that. I've done movies kind of all over the world and in all kinds of situations. So one of the things to be mindful of is, well, the location, what is it? What can it be? And the more simplified from a budget point of view, the better. So you might say, well, my uncle has a ranch out in Montana, and we could set it there, and that would be great. Well, that's a great approach. Once you start going into big cities, Los Angeles, New York, anywhere where you're interacting with the public, there's just all of these layers that get opened up. And when I said earlier, the note about control, of course, that's what you want. You want to have control of your set. So when you're out in the public, it's really difficult and expensive to get control. When you have to shut down a whole block so that nobody's walking into your shot, your actors can concentrate, and you have control of that block. You might even be controlling the traffic. So obviously studio movies have the ultimate control because they have a lot of money and they have a big budget. And so they're maintaining that control. So if you don't have a big budget, where can you get that control? Where you can guarantee your actors and director and your whole team can focus. It'll be quiet for sound. So often it's more the simple locations. Now, another consideration is, well, where is this location and how do we get to it and how rugged is it? It's easy to write that they're going to hike up to El Capitan or somewhere, but shooting in rugged, distant, dangerous locations, it can be done. It's just time consuming and more expensive because you have to put in all of these layers of safety. One of the first movies I did after graduating from AFI was a ski movie, and we went to Aspen, Colorado, and we were filming on the mountain, and we had one big day where we took our cast all the way to the top of the mountain. So it was a big day. We worked out a deal with the mountain to bring us up. We had all the equipment brought up, and we were at 10,000 feet. And it was a smooth day, but there was a ton of planning that went in. There was a ton of costs, and it was fairly complicated and expensive to bring the entire company up to the top of the mountain to shoot our scenes up there. Working on distant location, rugged location, remote locations. Shooting even on the beach is a consideration. Just walking in the sand slows everything down. And then, of course, working on water is a whole nother set of layers. Whether you're in open water or closed water, water has all of these elements to it. So location, 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 important to be mindful of if that's something that you can control in your writing, because it's not determined and set like a plot point in terms of the story, like, well, they have to be here. The simpler, the better for budget. So I'm going to move on to item number 2. And this is a consideration a lot of people don't think about. And I have it listed as day or night, interior, exterior, and magic hour. So I'm going to flip back to screen sharing to here, screen share. So sometimes people say, well, hey, what are these colors? Okay, well, they represent those 4 elements. And when you're scheduling a film, there's really only 4. There's interior or exterior. That's pretty self-evident. And then there's day or night. Actually, there's 6. So there's also morning and evening. So morning is magic hour, interior. I'm going to come back to talking about magic hour. So exterior, interior, day or night. A lot of considerations there. So let's talk about that. Shooting interior day is basically the most cost efficient and overall the most simple to shoot, because we tend to work and live in the daytime, so your crew are ready. Working at night, which I'll speak about in a moment, is much more complicated and expensive. And so interior day scenes are kind of, in general, the simplest. So from a writing point of view, that's kind of a safe lane. Where is your interior, and all these other elements is part of that consideration. Once you move outside, then you're opening yourselves up to, wherever you are, and the reality. You might have neighbor down the street with the dog barking, lawnmowers going, street traffic. So now you're exterior, but you're day. So, day lighting is more about crafting the light that exists. And so it's a little bit less time consuming from a lighting and grip and electric department point of view. So exterior day is less expensive than exterior night. So let's move on to night considerations. So here we've got night scenes, and we're inside all of these things, and they're supposed to be night for our story. So interior night, again, when you're interior, you have control. So depending on the location, here we've got 2 scenes that are interior garage. So a garage typically doesn't have any windows. So you could shoot that during the day. So I'd say that's an example of an interior night scene where you have control, and you could shoot it actually at night or during the daytime. And there's not a lot of considerations. But let's look at the living room scene. So if this house has just a wall of windows and it's interior night, you're really going to need to shoot that at night, okay, properly. You can do the process of what's called tenting, and they're going to drop down duvetine and visqueen and just basically black out the set if you're going to try to shoot that in the daytime. You might say to me, well, why don't we just shoot it at night? Well, that's fine. It's just that once you start working into night, there's a few considerations. If you're working through the whole night and your crew are working till 5 or 6 a.m., it's rough on the crew. You can do a few nights, and that's why you put them at the end of the week. But these night movies are really brutal, and some people do fine at night, but a lot of crew just don't function well at 3 or 4 in the morning. So it just slows everything down. And there's a lot of extra considerations, just, heaters and making it comfortable for the crew when you're working through the night, especially exteriors. And then also there's permit considerations. Some areas you just can't shoot past 10 p.m. So you can't shoot at night in, say, Beverly Hills or certain neighborhoods. So there's location considerations for shooting night, either interior or exterior. So in general, you may want to consider it when you're making a scene night, if it could just easily be day. So let's talk about magic hour. Magic hour is that golden hour. Sometimes it's only 45 minutes or 20 minutes, depending on where you are in the latitude. Here in LA, right now it's at, sunsets at about, I think, 6:30, and it lasts about 40 minutes. The higher you are and the time of the day, it might last longer. So the magic hour is that golden hour where you just have that low light. That's when they're shooting all the car commercials, Terrence Malick films, and you get 2 of them. You get the morning and you get the evening, as long as it's not cloudy. And it's beautiful light, but again, it's very specific. And so when you're shooting an exterior scene in magic hour, you got to be ready. You're going to just get that short window of time. And if it's an interior, so this is here example, this is Zach's bedroom morning. You could control that. So the lighting and grip department can just basically create that soft glow in that look. So you could shoot that scene at any time, assuming there's just a few windows, so you're controlling it. But the more the windows, the less control. So magic hour, I would use sparingly. Sometimes I get scripts and it's all golden hour. I'm like, well, Terrence Malick makes his films this way, but he takes 3 months, and it's just not going to be realistic, because in reality, you're just going to have that golden hour for a short amount of time. You get 2 of them per day, and so it becomes a scheduling concern. All right, let's move on to number 3. So speaking roles versus background versus crowds. So the speaking roles are obviously your cast, and one of the considerations here is every time you're having a speaking role, you're going to be paying the SAG rates, okay? And so obviously your leads and all of those are going to be SAG, but some considerations would be when you have a scene and say you're making a gangster, you're writing a gangster script and you've got henchmen 1, 2, and 3. So to give them a line each has a big impact versus maybe just give the lines to henchman 1, and henchmen 2 and 3 are background actors. So there's a big difference in cost once you have an actor speak. Then they are day player. And once they speak within that project, they're going to be paid SAG, the day rate or the weekly for the entire show. So sometimes, you will throw somebody a line and give them that upgrade at the end of the film. That's a little trick that people do, or you just want to consider minimizing. And the reason I bring this up is a lot of scripts I get sometimes, it's just like they have everybody speaking, and it just adds up because all of those actors need to be cast, obviously paid for. You're going to rehearse with them. They're going to need to be coordinated. They're going to need a place to change, whether they get a room in the honey wagon or a trailer or a room in a house or a tent. And then they're obviously going to come to set and work that day. You're feeding them, you're putting wardrobe on them. So it just all adds up. So the difference between 50 speaking roles and 40 can be substantial. So every situation where you're like, well, that guy doesn't really need to say that line, I could have him say it. It's something to be mindful of when you're writing, of minimizing the speaking roles. Okay, now let's talk about background actors. So on a union film, your background will all be SAG, and so they're getting paid well above minimum wage. I think it's about $26 an hour now, and then you're following all the SAG rules. I mean, the good news is in New York and Los Angeles and the places where there's big film community and industry, these are great actors. I mean, there's professional background actors. So the SAG consideration is one thing. If you're a SAG film, the first 30 will be background if you're on the low budget agreement, or the first 57 on the standard scale agreement. So again, they're expensive. So then the question is, well, if you're writing for budget, how do you minimize that? The scene that comes back to the writing of, well, okay, the scene's in a bar. Is the bar filled or is it sparse? I mean, does it matter? And being creative with how many background actors, scene to scene to scene, is going to be something that might help with efficiencies with your budget. So one of the things we'll do with the scheduling is, say we're working in a restaurant and we've got 4 or 5 scenes spaced out all over the film. We try to use the same background and have them change wardrobe and mix it up. And so using the same background, but you can only do that so much. You don't want to, unless they're supposed to be there in scene 42 and scene 85, then you want to be careful. So you're going to need a certain amount of background for that production value that you're trying to achieve. And often there's this trim process that happens right before shooting of trimming down the background because it just all adds up. So if you're able to do that in the writing process, that can be helpful. Crowds are a whole nother challenge. Certainly when you're shooting at a football stadium, for instance, okay, you've got your foreground that will be background actors, and you're going to need them to be, professional background actors. They're in the foreground, they're close to your actors, and then there's their layer behind them. Once you go beyond the SAG minimum that is required, like I said, 57, so you cast all of those, then there's the crowd behind them. Well, then technically you should be paying the crowd that is coming to the set. That way they're under workers' comp and they're being paid. But if they're deep background, some movies do what's called just kind of a crowd scene, and they'll do a campaign to get a bunch of people to come to a stadium, for instance, and show up for a few hours, and you design your schedule to shoot all those wides while you have all those people there. And I've done shows where you put together a campaign and you have a raffle and you might have a band play and you get a reason to get them there so that they'll stay. Sometimes it's tough to get them to stay for more than 2 or 3 hours. Now, this is assuming you're not paying the deep background. And you might have seen this, another way of handling crowd scenes is visual effects. So in the deep background, you'll drop in, they used to do cardboard cutouts, and then those would look okay, and then they'll visually enhance those with visual effects. Again, that's a lot of work. So depending on how long the shot is the camera moving, the visual effects of filling in a background can be a considerable cost. So then it's back to the script. Do you need a crowd? How much do you need to see the crowd? Can that conversation between the coach and the quarterback take place during halftime in the hallway, and you can hear the crowd, but you're not seeing them, and you're just in this hallway tunnel that's going out to the field? You can see the film, you know the crowd are there, or you can just see a piece of them. So there's an efficient way of pivoting a scene that's important if you put it into that hallway or the locker room, as opposed to out on the field where you can see everybody. So crowds can really add up, and those are some considerations for writing for the crowd work. Let's move on to number 4, vehicle work. So vehicle work, again, can be very expensive and it's time consuming. So there's all sorts of ways to approach vehicle work. You might say, well, Jacob, we need this scene. We get 2 actors, he's driving down the road, and we need him to talk about, the heist. Okay, great. Well, to go against what I said earlier about the day or night, interior, exterior, there's a little trick for vehicle work that's actually very efficient, and it's called poor man's process. So it's what it sounds like. It's the poor man's process, and it only can apply to night scenes for cars. And what's done is, if the actors in the car are not driving down a specific street, like Las Vegas Boulevard, where you can see all the buildings, say they're on a rural road, but you need them, the coverage that's as important as the conversation. You can simply just put them in a car in a parking lot, not moving, and the grips are shimmying the car. The lighting department is working some light grids. It sounds like they're moving. Post sound is going to put in the car engine noise, and it can look amazing. And your actors aren't moving at all. They're not driving the vehicle. Nobody's moving. And that's called poor man's process. So night exterior car, and you can move the camera all around the car because it's, you're not moving, and it can be great. But you might say, well, no, that's not going to work. They need to drive down Santa Monica Boulevard. We're going to see those billboards. We got to go past all of those iconic stores. Okay, well, how do you do that? Well, the big budget films will use what's called a process trailer. That's literally putting the car on a trailer, towing it. They can put the rigging and the lighting, and most people have seen them one time or another. It's a big trailer, and it's very exciting because you've got your actors and some of your department and your director, and they're driving around filming the scene. That's great, but it's very expensive. You need police, you need to shut down the road, you have total control of the road, process trailer, all of that equipment. But you can put the camera right there outside of the window. Take it down a notch. You can do what's called hostess trays, camera rig, and you can rig the camera to the car. Again, you'll still need, and your actors can be driving down the road, but you'll still need control with police ahead and after, and to create it safely. And then if you're not on a process trailer, your actors are actually driving. So you have to consider that. That's another consideration. You want them to be a good driver. I have stories of actors where they almost took out a lamppost and a $250,000 camera because they got too close, and it was because they were focused on the scene, and they're driving. So whenever you have actors driving, there's that consideration for safety and the control of the road. Moving in to less expensive with the car work, bring the camera into the car, put the DP in the seat next to the actor he's driving, flip it around, have that camera, you cheat it, and you could get coverage. Obviously, you could get it from the back seat, and your director might look at, he might look at me and say, well, I don't want to do that, so, can that coverage work? That's a creative consideration. But once you bring the camera into the car, then you don't have cameras sticking out, and it's less dangerous, but still you have your actors driving potentially. So all of these considerations for vehicle work. I mentioned earlier picture cars. So picture cars, every car that's going to be in the picture, and you've got your hero cars that are the actors are really driving. So it's just expensive to be renting these vehicles, wrangling them. You might be like, well, I'll get it for free. Then you have to coordinate, your Uncle Ted bringing the car when you need it, making sure it's running properly. So the more cars, the more expensive. And obviously, period, picture vehicles, even more. And so writing for budget, you might want to very carefully consider every time you're having a vehicle operate in a scene and every time you're using a vehicle. Even when it's just an establishing shot of the gang outside of the house and all their cars are there. Well, that's a simple shot, just establishing like, hey, they're at the house, but you have to bring all those cars there. And cars just take a minute to move and coordinate. So vehicle work is an important consideration. The second half of that, I just said / camera work, and I want to touch on camera work and its consideration. And from a writing point of view, you might not be writing in camera direction, and I think sometimes that's a no-no for screenwriting, but anything that's implied with camera movement, and what I mean by camera movement, steady cam, dolly, anytime we're moving the camera, ready rig, movie, there's all these fancy ways, beautiful ways of moving the camera, and camera movement gives you production value and you're following your actors, or you might be covering it with a drone. It's time consuming and it can be expensive. And so writing for budget, you might be considerate of every time you're going to need to move the camera and being mindful of that. And how do you adjust for that? Well, it's when you're moving your actors. So, there's a big difference between an actor sitting at their desk or having a conversation or running, or jogging down the road, or the actors walking down the Melrose Avenue as opposed to sitting in a park under the tree. So every time you're moving the elements, your actors, your cast, your story, the camera's going to need to move with it, most likely. So camera movement can add costs. And so being considerate of that. Let's go on to number 5. And I'm going to try to move through these last 3 pretty quickly so we have time for questions at the end. Number 5 is just a whole host of complicated elements. So one of the first things I ask when I'm about to budget a script and people come to me and haven't read the script yet, I ask, well, are there complicated elements? So if there are, it's going to make it more complicated to schedule and budget and the considerations there. So complicated elements are things such as stunts, special effects, visual effects, animals, minors. We've already touched on a few others, distant locations, working on water, boats, mountains. So complicated elements are exactly what they sound like. They're more complicated, they're more complex. Obviously, you're going to break them down carefully, and it all comes down to what do we need to see? And with the movie magic tricks of cutting and editing and sometimes visual effects, you can break down each element, and you're most likely going to, unless you have tons of money, you're going to break it down to the simplest form. But stunts, for instance, it's like, well, what are we seeing? If it's just a slap, it's one thing, or if it's a full out bar brawl, it's another thing. And all of that's going to need to be broken down very carefully, beginning with your stunt coordinator, stunt doubles, and figuring out a way to get all of that coverage safely so it looks great and it's got the impact and the point of the scene, and you're telling your story. So stunts slow things down. Certainly when you're doing a stunt double, then you're paying a SAG stunt actor, the same as your regular actors. They're coming in, you're paying 2 actors that day. You have your stunt doubles. Of course, you need them though, because they're the professionals that can do the stunt safely. While some actors do their own stunts, it's a whole consideration there. So stunts, special effects, again, gunfire, all of the things that are happening in front of the camera, they're called practical effects, mechanical effects, special effects on set. So those are things that are not visual effects done in a computer later. Special effects, blowing things up, shooting, squibs, all of these things take time. You need to do them safely. They can be very expensive. And so it's going to slow things down. and have a cost implication. Same thing with visual effects. And a lot of amazing things can be done, and you can create worlds in which you could never afford with visual effects, but still a big consideration there, not only for post and what are the visual effects going to department, how much time will they need for all of their artists and the management of all of that for post, but even while you're shooting, are you shooting against green screen? You'll need the visual effects supervisor to come, and they're supervising all the elements. So visual effects, while they're wonderful and it's a great storytelling tool, again, cost implications there. Animals, probably obvious, but animals are amazing, and there's great animal trainers and wranglers, and whether you're working with exotic animals, wild animals, or domestic or trained animals, there's a whole thing there. Animal trainers and wranglers are represented by the Teamsters, and so they're the union and guild, and it just is, again, time consuming. And so I'd be sparingly using animals in your script. It's one thing to have a cat sleeping on somebody's lap versus, a bird doing exactly what you want it to do in a scene. The last one in there is minors. So working with children, there's SAG labor law rules. You have very limited time depending on their age. A lot of times you'll work with doubles or twins, so you can expand the day of two kids. They're twins, they're identical. So using that, photo doubles, stand-ins, basically you have to do a real micro analysis. I've done a few films where it's all kids. And so you have to be really smart in your scheduling because you have a limited amount of time. They need to go to school, they need to rest. And when I mean go to school, they go to the trailer and they do their homework for half an hour or 3 hours a day or whatever the rule is. School, rest, recreation, and then there's the time on set. So working with minors, depending on their age. One little trick is there's a big difference between 15 and 16. So the rule is from 9 to 15, it's one set of rules for the hours. And then when they turn 16 and 17, unless they're emancipated, you get a little bit more time. So there's a big difference between 15 and 16. And that's their actual age, not how old they look. Okay, two more here. Period versus contemporary. So naturally, period is a much more expensive depending on the period in which you're producing. And it just depends on you whether you're going forward into the future or into the past. And of course, it's doing period properly and carefully is a big thing. And you might have a lot of layers to that. Obviously, all the wardrobe, stunt, set dressing, props, picture vehicles, hair, makeup, the lighting, and the locations. Even just going back 20 years was before, a lot of things were ubiquitous with, smartphones and all of the things, or 30 years in how things look. So it's just more expensive and everything's going to take a little bit longer and cost more to prepare versus contemporary. So war scenes, somebody said, Kyla, yes, war scenes, massive, and you might have, I think there's a classic example in a script, it's 1/8 of a page, the cavalry overtake the hill. Okay, we get the idea, that's the story beat. A studio might spend 10 days or 3 weeks shooting that. Like, what are we seeing? So war scenes combine all of these things with complicated special effects, stunts, locations, and period. So just adds more cost. War movies are very complicated and expensive. The last item here on the outline is tax incentives, states and countries. So you might say, well, what's a tax incentive? What it sounds like. There's these programs all over the United States in about 35 states and countries all over the world where they have incentives to try to incentivize movie production to come to their state, set up shop, and film. Some of the big ones are obviously Georgia, Louisiana. We have a big program in California, New York. And so I just mentioned this because these locations, sometimes if you're writing for instance, New Mexico, there's a great program there. If your story can take place in a tax incentive state or country, you're going to want to pursue that because say you spend $3 million and you work the program, you're going to get a tax credit back or a rebate from the program, from the state of $700,000 or $800,000. So that's early revenue you can bring back. You're still going to need to raise the full budget, but then you work a tax incentive program and you'll get that that money back from the state. Sometimes it takes a year or 6 months, but you'll get that money back. And the investors always like to see that you're being mindful of. So you might just think about, well, where can this story take place? Let's pick a tax incentive state. And a lot of times you can find the right fit. Last one is interesting idea to just throw into the hopper for low budget pictures. Screen Actors Guild has a lot of agreements, and there's various tiers: budget, modified low budget, ultra low budget. And again, it's just discount on the cost you're paying your actors and your background. They have what's called a SAG diversity casting incentive. And it's a pretty big lift on the ceiling. So the low budget goes from 2 million to 3 if you qualify. And how do you qualify? It's the speaking roles, 20% of the total need to be people of color, so minorities. And then 50% are of the 4 groups: people of color, seniors, performers with disabilities, and women. So you have to hit both thresholds. I've done it on quite a few films, and it just basically increases that ceiling. So when you're writing, you might want to consider writing, if it's a low budget picture, for casting incentive. And that's, again, who are the characters and the roles. So that concludes the cruise through of the writing for budget outline and examples, and I'm happy to take questions.
So you just talked about tax incentives. Is there any resources or websites or anything to go to learn about which states do what, or do you have to go to each state's like film site?
Entertainment Partners is the preeminent. So I just put it in the chat. It's www.ep.com, production incentives. So Entertainment Partners, of course, they're the preeminent payroll company, and they own everything now, Movie Magic. So they have this site. It's free. It's great. It's the summary of the whole world. And it's a big map, and you can pop in there and be like, well, where in the United States? Pop into the map, and you can just cruise over it. You can see what the programs are.
Let's talk about just generally, why is it smart? Well, first, it's a 2-part question. Why is it smart for somebody, let's say a general newbie filmmaker, to hire somebody to create a budget for them versus buying the software and trying to fuddle through and do it yourself? And then second part is, how much would it cost, generally, to hire somebody to create a budget for you?
Great question. Well, the budgeting process, scheduling, budgeting, line producing, what I do and many others do, it's a whole career. I've been doing it for 25 years, and just a master, which is the summary of all of the union contracts that we use to refer to. Entertainment Partners publishes that. It's 700 pages. So my rebuttal would be like, okay, if you're going to remodel your house, are you going to do the electrical and the plumbing yourself? Can you teach yourself? Yeah, but give yourself 6 months at least, and you're still not going to be anywhere where a professional line producer will be. It's highly detailed work. I get a lot of clients that give up and come to me, and they show me what they did. I'm like, all right, let's throw that in the trash. We're going to start over, and I'm building it on a highly detailed template, which I've crafted for 20 years. And it's just like, how could you have that experience? It's very, very specific. And so my advice is hire a professional and get that experience in the same way you would hire a professional to prepare your taxes or do the electrical on your dream home. Just to throw out some sample ideas of the services. So for an independent film that's, say, non-union, and that union line in the sand is like $1 million. And so a very simple film, shooting in the United States, if I'm not busy, I might throw out a bid to potential client of saying, okay, I can create the budget for you for $1,500.
Okay.
On the top sheet will be half of that, $750. You'll just get the top sheet, but you can show that to investors. You can put it in your deck, your business plan. You know that bottom line, well, how did you get to 1.5? I don't know, we just guessed. Or no, I had a professional line producer. Here's the budget, here's the top sheet, and so that's the thing I guarantee with my services of when I build a budget, it's completely thought out, and it's based on a set of assumptions that the filmmaker and the writer understand. Once we start veering into an unrealistic realm of this isn't really doable, and a lot of times people come to me and say, I need it to be 2 million. And I'll say, well, okay, then let's go back and talk about the script, because what you've written here is really a $4 million film.
Right.
So you can make half a movie or change the script or just have a phony budget. Like, you know,
Right.
I mean, it is just numbers on a piece of paper, but in reality, when it goes through and you're actually making the film, all these numbers become extremely important. And again, I like to set up my clients, my films, my colleagues for success. Have the right amount of money. And often it's a lot more than what you think.
Yep. True. How is COVID playing into budgets? Is there, like, should you think about 20% more, 10%, you know, like, is there a general number that COVID's sort of adding to, say, independent $1 million budgets?
So I just budget the details of COVID. We've been shooting since COVID. So you have your safety officers, testing, PPE, cleaning, and I'll just budget the detail of how many shooting days, that department. And when COVID first hit a year ago, people were tacking on 15%. And when we put in our numbers, they were about 16%, but those costs have come down now. Everything's more efficient and cheaper. There's lots of ways to get testing and the testing costs. So I would recommend putting in the detail rather than some sort of percentage, because if you have a huge budget and you put 10%, it's going to be inflated. It's probably not going to cost that much. And it really should be reflective of, well, what is your COVID plan? Are you testing twice a week, 3 times a week, once a week? Are you testing post? And just reflecting. So again, the devil's in the details, and I recommend always just detailing out the COVID expenses.
Right. Okay, cool. So Marie is asking, what are the rules of thumb for estimating a budget in terms of, like, is there a way for a writer when writing the script to think about, okay, if I know I have a crowd scene, is there a way to sort of like guesstimate things like that, or no?
Guesstimate the cost?
Yeah. If you were just thinking in terms of like, okay, will this cost me X amount, or, you know what I mean? Are there any sort of like tricks?
Well, one thing that's helpful is to think of, and I say this to the writer and the director when we're planning, and even the first AD, what's the least amount of extras to achieve the look and the point of the story? You know, if the bar is supposed to be full, okay, then we stack up the extras in the foreground, and can we get a full looking bar with 20? Can we do it with 15? And, you know, this is often a challenge, and they don't want more people there sitting around than they need. And you often like shoot the wide. So as from a writing point of view, I would just try to think of, well, what's the minimum amount of people? And you might write that into the script. A bar, not too busy, say 10 people are milling around. You think 10 is enough to sort of establish that time of day and the vibe of the bar or whatever scene it is. So it's helpful rather than just completely leaving it nondescript. And if it's a large amount, then you would work with, well, what is the most efficient way photographically to give the impression of it being a large amount? Like I said, with the stadium, you're going to fill it in with visual effects later, or you try to stay out of those wide shots.
Okay. Alexander's asking, is there a place where, is it the entertainment partner site too also, where you can find the industry standard rates for DPs, crew, things like that?
On the EP site, you can buy what's called the Paymaster. They publish it once a year, and it has all of the union rates in it. It's about $40. And yes, they're all in there. It's very complicated. Well, what contract applies to what? Sure. But if you understand all of that, you can find all what's called the scale or the union rates, you know. And so if you're going to just pay scale to your DP, that will be in there based on what are you planning, a 12-hour day or a 10, 14. And so all the rates are in the EP Paymaster. Cool.
Francesca's asking, could you repeat again the names of the apps or the software that you were showing us through today?
Yes. And again, they're sold through entertainment partners, and there's Movie Magic Scheduling and Movie Magic Budgeting. And then I also referenced, they have their incentive, tax incentive summary page, and they also sell the Paymaster, which has the summary of all the agreements.
I hope you're getting a cut from entertainment partners for pimping out their page. Okay. Alexander is also asking, for a film that we finance ourselves, can you please explain what are the back-end units we can use instead of wages?
Well, I wouldn't recommend not paying your crew or your cast for a few reasons. Certainly with union, you can't have them waive their fee. There's also the consideration of they really are employees, and here in California, they just cracked down on subcontractors, basically a 1099. It's AB 5 rules. And so if you're not paying people properly, the company could open itself up to liability. And certainly you would want to have workers' compensation, whether you can get a workers' compensation through the state or not. But if you're paying people through payroll, that's all embedded and included. Now it adds costs. So if the question is offering back in lieu of pay, I would recommend try to pay your crew, even minimum wage. If you're not going to pay them, be careful with the liability. And in terms of offering back in, movies do this all the time. They might do a carve out for the crew of say 10% of the producer's net, and they're just offering half a point to the DP and half. That's just all negotiable. And that's like, well, what are you offering? And if you're controlling the financing, then you can control that conversation. If you're not, you're going to want to make sure you're including your financiers in that. Be careful. Back-end participation also, though, out of 16 movies, I only got it once. And it was a movie that was made on a low budget and did very well. We premiered at Sundance and Cannes. We won a bunch of awards. The movie's called Mean Creek, and it turned out great. We actually got some of our points, our profit participation and deferment. And out of 16 movies, and most people would say this, like, you just never see much, or it'll be one. And so it's like nice to offer that, but it's also a huge pain contractually and also in terms of accounting later. And so I think it's cleaner to just pay your crew up front and then keep the back end participation limited to, obviously you're going to offer to sometimes your cast, lead, players, your director, your producer, and keep that pool small. And that's typically where things are going now.
Deborah's asking, do you recommend getting a budget for a 1-hour pilot when you're trying to sell a series to producers?
Great question. Yes. And I do budget pilots all the time. And what's important when you're doing that process, so the pilot, if it's emblematic of, well, the pilot will be similar to episodes 2, 3, and 4 in terms of the complexity and where they're shooting, then the pilot can be what's often called a pattern budget. So you could do a detailed budget or a rough budget to get a top sheet, but a detailed budget would be best of the pilot episode. And okay, that's basically emblematic of the series, and we want it to be a 10-part series. So then you multiply it by 10, and then you do what's called an Amor budget, amortized budget for the costs to support the series, because it's different than just shooting one episode. So then there's the Amor budget, the pattern budget, and those two combined is the complete budget for the series. And you can, in the software, just basically put a multiplier of 10 and build that into a global, because you might say, all right, 10's too many. What about if we just do 8 episodes? And I can quickly change that in the budget.
Cool. And then this one's just very timely right now. What are your thoughts about the looming strike that's happening, and how will that most likely affect budgets in terms of crew?
So quick thoughts, certainly hope for the industry that they resolve it without a strike so people can keep working. And my position on that personally is I think that the streamers have gotten a great deal for, I think, 10 years now. And it makes sense to just bring all of the agreements for television and movies into alignment with what the streamers were getting. And they need to fix that contract. I certainly hope they make it less complicated, because these agreements are very complicated. And I'm hopeful that they'll hammer it out. If they strike, it's just going to be that drama, and they're going to have to figure it out. And then these agreements, once they're negotiated, they typically negotiate them, and then the agreement stands for 3 years. Then they'll go into the paymaster, and that's where all the information will be.
Excellent. Do you have any final thoughts? Anything that you want to say at the end? Any shout outs or throw outs to your site? How can people find you, reach you, get in touch with you?
Thanks for that. Yeah, so my site is filmbudgetpro.com. And there's a questionnaire page or a contact page. You can reach me there. You can find out more about what I've been doing with my career. And if you need certainly any help on a budget, schedule, or tax incentive analysis, that's what I do as a consultant. And so happy to engage with you there. And that's how to reach me. And I would just say, you know, in terms of writing, like these are just pointers to keep in mind. I hope it's helpful. Again, it's just, you know, find your passion, tell your story. It's so hard to get a movie made. And the reason I thought this course might be helpful is what happens is it's really tough to get financing always. Mm-hmm. And what happens often is you can get some leads on money, but it's never quite enough. So if you're mindful of all of these writing budget considerations early on, it's just going to help in that process. You're going to be going after less money. You can hopefully get it quicker and have the right amount of money to make a great film. And great films can be made on a low budget. You know, I'm a fan of huge budget movies, like, you know, whatever, it's a storytelling thing, but there's creative ways of solving it. And it's nice to solve it when it's just a writer and maybe the director and the producer, and they're just sitting in a room, rather than on the 14th day of set, everyone's totally fried out and tired. Things are falling apart. You're running out of money, running out of time, and you're rewriting and making compromises in the field. Right. That's the last place you want to make changes. Or in post, where you just have what you've got and you're working with what happened and what you went out. So if you're doing it up front, it's definitely the most sort of efficient approach to kind of solving some of these issues. So that's the hope that I was able to provide some tips for that process.
No, it was great. I think that you unraveled a little bit of the mystery when it comes to thinking about a budget for your film or whatever project you're doing. I think you broke down some of those things that were kind of like, wait, what? I don't even know what this means. And when someone says, what's your budget? I don't know. So I think you did a wonderful job. And I personally learned a lot of tips and tricks. So thank you so much.